What's up, folks? I'm Dan, and welcome to I've Been Meaning to Read That, the show where I read books out loud that I've been meaning to read. Let's go. Good afternoon, folks. Now, if you're like me, you're probably thinking about what you would do or would have done if you were in Fantine's situation, as described last week. She's broke, she's got a kid, she doesn't have a job, and she lives in a society where being an unwed mother is extremely frowned upon, to say the least. Now, the first thing that came into my head was, why doesn't Fantine just bring Cosette to live with her and say that her husband died? I mean, this is before a time where there's lots of formal record keeping, and, you know, it would be very hard to prove that she did not marry while she was living outside of Montreuil-sur-Mer and her husband died, at which point she came back. Also, that's got to be a fairly common thing, right? Like, people's spouses and children dying and there being no records of it, or moving to a brand new place where nobody knows you and, you know, having some years that you can't verify what they were doing. So that was my first thought. I think, though, that Fantine realizes that she had spent all of her money getting, started in Montreuil-sur-Mer and wouldn't have the money to just go get Cosette and bring her back, especially once she loses her job. But I still don't get why she didn't just tell people, yeah, I do have a daughter, my husband passed away, and so she's living with these friends of mine until I can get established on my feet. Like, that just seems like the smart thing to do. But then again, we got to remember that Fantine doesn't have much in the way of a formal education, so she might not be the brightest bulb. Also, she might be pretty proud, or people had already made up their mind, and so she didn't have a way to disprove what they were saying and realized that it would be very difficult to change their minds. I don't know. So it seems like Fantine is just stuck in this situation of being extremely broke, then losing her job, and finally, as the last words, very powerful, by the way, when a book is as wordy and verbose as it is, to have the last two words of the chapter say, three words, she became a prostitute. That's crazy. All right, well, let's get back to Fantine's story and see what it is she decides to do about her situation. Before we get going with the reading, though, the chapter title that we're about to start on is Christus nos liberavit, which I just had to look up, and it means Christ has freed us. All right, now let's get to it. Chapter 11, Christus nos liberavit. What is the true story of Fantine? It is the story of society's purchase of a slave purchased from poverty, hunger, cold, loneliness, defenselessness, destitution, a squalid bargain, a human soul for a hunk of bread. Poverty offers and society accepts. Our society is governed by the precepts of Jesus Christ, but is not yet imbued with them. We say that slavery has vanished from European civilization, but this is not true. Slavery still exists, but now it applies only to women, and its name is prostitution. It afflicts women, that is to say, it preys on grace, frailty, beauty, motherhood. It is not the least of man's shames. At the sad point which our tale has now reached, there is nothing left of the girl who was once Fantine. In becoming dirt, she has been turned to stone. To touch her is to feel a chill. She submits to and ignores the customer. She is the unmoving countenance of the dishonored. Life and the social order have said their last word to her. Everything has happened to her that can happen. She has known everything, borne and suffered everything, lost everything, and shed her last tear. She is resigned with the resignation that resembles indifference as death resembles sleep. She no longer seeks to escape from anything, nor does she fear anything. Let the heavens fall, let the tides of the sea engulf her, and what can it matter? She has had her fill. Or so she believes, but it is an error to suppose that we can ever exhaust fate or reach the end of anything. What is the riddle of these countless scattered destinies? Whither are they bound? Why are they, as they are. He who knows the answer to this knows all things. He is alone. His name is God. End of chapter 11. Chapter 12. The idleness of Monsieur Bamatabois. In every small town, and this was particularly so in Montreuil-sur-Mer, there is a class of young men who squander an income of 1,500 francs in the provinces, much as their peers in Paris squander an income of 200,000. They belong to the great species of neuters, the geldings, parasites, non-entities, who own a little land, a little silliness, and a little wit, who would look like clods in a fashionable salon, but think themselves gentlemen in a tavern, who talk about my fields and my peasants, who boo actresses in the theater to prove themselves men of taste, pick quarrels with the officers of the garrison to prove that they are men of spirit. They shoot, smoke, yawn, drink, smell of tobacco, play billiards, watch the travelers descending from the stagecoach, live in the cafe, dine at the inn, own a dog which eats scraps under the table, and a mistress who sets the dishes on top of it. They watch their pennies, carry current fashions to the extreme, patronize the drama, despise women, wear out their old boots, copy London by way of Paris, and Paris by way of Pont-à-Mousson, and grow old and feeble-minded, having never worked or served any purpose or done any great harm. Monsieur Felix Tholomyès, had he stayed in the provinces and never come to Paris, would have been one of these. Richer, they would be called bucks or fops. Poorer, they would be called vagabonds. They are simply idlers, boring or bored, or daydreaming idlers, with a few wags among them. At that period, a fop sported a high collar, a spreading cravat, a watch with a fob, 3 superimposed waistcoats of different colors, the blue and the red being underneath, a high-waisted, olive-colored, fish-tailed coat with a double row of silver buttons sewn close together and rising up to the shoulders, and trousers of a lighter olive adorned with pleats on either side, always an equal number ranging from 1 to 11, this limit being never exceeded. To which may be added low boots with metal heel caps, a narrow-brimmed tall hat, a very large cane, and conversation sparkling with witticisms borrowed from Potier of the Theatre de Varieties. Above all, spurs and a mustache. The mustache in those days was the hallmark of a civilian. The spurs were the mark of a pedestrian. The provincial fop wore longer spurs and a bushier mustache. It was the period of the struggle of the South American republics against Spain, of Bolivar against Murillo. The narrow-brimmed hats, indicative of monarchist sympathies, were called Murillos. Liberals wore broad-brimmed hats called Bolivars. Some 8 or 10 months after the events just recorded, on a snowy evening at the beginning of January 1824, one of these elegant idlers, a gentleman of unorthodox opinions, for he was wearing a Murillo, and was in addition warmly clad in the sort of greatcoat that completed the fashionable costume in cold weather, was exercising his wit at the expense of a woman in a low-cut evening gown with flowers in her hair, who was prowling to and fro outside the officers' cafe. The gentleman was smoking, this being highly fashionable. Each time the woman passed, he blew a cloud of smoke in her direction, and favored her with a fresh sally reflecting on her looks, her attire, and anything else that occurred to him. The name of the gentleman was Monsieur Bamatabois. The woman, a sad and garish ghost coming and going through the snow, paid no attention to him, but with the somber resignation of a soldier condemned to a flogging, continued her silent patrol, which, every few minutes, brought her within range of his sarcasms. Finding that he was producing no effect, the gentleman got to his feet, crept up behind her, scooped up a handful of snow, and thrust it down her back between her bare shoulders. The woman uttered a cry and, turning, sprang at him like a tigress, ripping his face with her fingernails and screaming at him in language that might have shocked an army sergeant. The stream of obscenities, uttered in a voice coarsened by cheap brandy, poured hideously out of a gap-toothed mouth. The woman was Fantine. The noise brought the officers running out of the cafe. A circle of laughing, hooting, applauding spectators formed round this whirlwind composed of 2 creatures whom it was difficult to recognize as a man and a woman, the man seeking to defend himself with his hat knocked off, the woman hitting, kicking, and screaming, frenzied and horrible. Suddenly, a tall man broke through the circle, seized the woman by her mud-stained satin corsage, and said, "You come along with me." The woman looked round and was abruptly silent. Her eyes went glassy, and from being livid with fury, she became pale and trembling with alarm. She had recognized Javert. Monsieur Bamatabois took advantage of the interruption to hurry away. End of Chapter 12. Chapter 13. At the police post. Thrusting aside the onlookers, Javert made rapidly for the police post on the far side of the square, dragging the unhappy woman with him. She made no resistance. Neither spoke a word. The spectators followed, hooting with delight. The utmost extremity of degradation is the obscene merriment to which it gives rise. The police post was a low room, heated by a stove, with a barred, glass-paneled door opening onto the street. After entering with Fantine, Javert shut this door behind him, to the great disappointment of the sightseers, who stood on tiptoe and craned their necks in their effort to follow the proceedings. Curiosity is a form of gluttony. To see is to devour. Fantine crouched down in a corner of the room, motionless and silent, huddled like a frightened animal. The duty sergeant placed a lit candle on the table. Javert seated himself at it, and getting a sheet of officially stamped paper out of his pocket, began to write. Under present laws, women of this class are wholly at the mercy of the police. The police can do with them what they like, punish them as they see fit, and, if they choose, deprive them of those two sad possessions which they term their calling and their liberty. Javert was quite impassive, his sober expression betraying no emotion. But the fact is that he was gravely and deeply exercised in his mind. This was one of those cases where he must use his formidable discretionary powers without resort to any higher authority, but with all the scruples dictated by his own rigid conscience. His office chair at that moment was a seat of justice, before which the case must be tried, judgment delivered, and sentence pronounced. He summoned all the powers of his mind, all his principles, to deal with this weighty matter, and the more he studied it, the more outrageous did he find it. What he had witnessed was undeniably a crime. He had seen society, in the person of a landowner and voter, insulted and attacked in the street by a creature outside society. A prostitute had assaulted a citizen. He, Javert, had seen it with his own eyes. He wrote on in silence. When he had finished writing, he signed the document, folded it, and, handing it to the duty sergeant, said, "Have this woman taken to the jail under guard." He then turned to Fantine and said, "You're getting 6 months." She uttered a cry of despair. 6 months? 6 months in prison, earning 7 sous a day? But what about Cosette? What about my daughter? And I still owe more than 100 francs to the Thénardiers, Monsieur Inspector. Did you know that? Without getting to her feet, she dragged herself across the floor, muddied as it was by the boots of many men, shuffling hastily on her knees with her hands clasped. "Monsieur Javert, I beg you, be merciful. It was not my fault. If you had seen how it started, you would know. I swear by God it was not my fault. The gentleman, I don't know who he was, put snow down my back. Has anyone the right to put snow down a person's back when they're just walking past, doing no harm? It gave me a shock. I'm not very well, you see. And then he'd been saying unpleasant things to me, how ugly I was, and about my having lost my teeth, as if I didn't know. I didn't answer. I just thought, well, if it amuses him, and I walked quietly on, and that was when he put the snow down my back. Monsieur Javert, is there no one who saw what happened and can tell you? I was wrong to lose my temper, but when a thing like that happens, something ice cold pushed down your back when you aren't expecting it, you forget yourself, you lose control. I shouldn't have damaged the gentleman's hat, but why did he have to run away? I'd have apologized. Good God, I don't mind apologizing. Let me off just this once, Monsieur Javert. I don't suppose you know, but all one can earn in prison is 7 sous a day. It's not the government's fault, but that's all it is, 7 sous, and I owe 100 francs, and if I don't pay, my little girl will be turned out into the street. God help me. I can't have her with me, the life I lead. What will become of the poor mite? It's those people, those innkeepers, the Thénardiers. They aren't fair. They aren't reasonable. All they want is money. Don't send me to prison. They'll turn her out into the street, a child. At this time of year, midwinter, you've got to think of that, Monsieur Javert. If she was older, she could earn her living, but not at her age. I'm not really a bad woman. It isn't idleness or greed that has made me what I am. I drink eau de vie, but from sheer misery, not because I like it, but it dulls the mind. If you'd looked in my wardrobe when things were going better for me, you'd have seen that I wasn't just a light woman leading a disorderly life. I had clean, decent linen, plenty of it. Have pity on me, Monsieur Javert. She crouched there with her bosom half bared, hands clasped together, face wet with tears, while the words poured out in a low, heart-rending flow broken by that small, dry cough. The extremity of grief sheds its own awful radiance to transform even the most abject. At that moment, bending forward to press the hem of the policeman's greatcoat to her lips, Fantine was beautiful again. She might have melted a heart of stone, but nothing can melt a heart of wood. "Well," said Javert, "I've listened to you. Is that all you have to say? Then off you go. You're getting 6 months, and the Eternal Father himself can't alter it." The solemn mention of the Eternal Father forced her to realize that the sentence was final. She collapsed on the floor, moaning, "Mercy, mercy, mercy." Javert turned his back on her, and 2 policemen took her by the arms. A few minutes previously, a man had entered unobserved. Closing the door behind him, he had remained with his back to it, listening to Fantine's despairing plea. Now, while the men were trying to drag her to her feet, he emerged from the shadows and said, "One moment, if you please." Javert looked round and saw that it was Monsieur Madeleine. Removing his hat, he bowed stiffly. "I beg your pardon, Monsieur le Maire." The words had a remarkable effect on Fantine. Rising instantly from the floor like a ghost emerging from the earth, she thrust aside the 2 men and, before they could stop her, had planted herself fiery-eyed in front of Madeleine. "So you're the mayor, are you?" She laughed and spat in his face. Monsieur Madeleine wiped his cheek and said, "Inspector Javert, this woman is to go free." Javert felt for a moment that he was going mad. He was beset by a confusion of the most violent emotions he had ever experienced in his life. To see a woman of the town spit in the face of the mayor was a thing so monstrous that even in his wildest imaginings he would not have dared to think it possible. And at the same time, at the back of his mind, he had an obscure sense of some hideous connection between the woman and this man who was mayor, which, to his horror, made the act intelligible. But when he saw the mayor, the magistrate, calmly wipe his face and heard him say that the woman was to go free, stupefaction overwhelmed him. Thought and words both failed him. He had passed beyond the bounds of amazement and could say nothing. Fantine was no less astounded. Reaching out a bare arm, she clung to the nearest object available for her support. It was, in fact, the handle operating the damper of the stove, and staring about her, began to talk in a low voice, as though to herself. "To go free? Not to spend 6 months in prison? But who said it? No one can have said it. I must have misheard. It couldn't have been that monster, the mayor. Did you say it, good Monsieur Javert? Did you say that I was to go free? Look, I'll explain everything, and then you'll let me go. It was all the fault of that vile creature, the mayor. He dismissed me because of the things some of the women said. Wasn't that abominable, to turn away an honest working girl? So then I couldn't earn enough, and that was the trouble. There's something the police should do, Monsieur Javert. They should prevent the prison contractors from injuring the poor. What I mean is this. You're earning 12 sous a day stitching shirts, and then it's cut down to 9, and you can't earn enough to live on. So then you have to do what you can. I had Cassette to think of, so I was forced to become a bad woman. You do see, don't you, that it was that monster, the mayor, who was at the bottom of it all?
and then I knocked the gentleman's hat off outside the officer's cafe, but he'd ruined my dress with his snow, and we girls, we only have one silk dress for evenings. Truly, I've never meant to harm anyone, and I know plenty of women worse than me who are much better off. You did say, didn't you, Monsieur Javert, that I can go? You can ask people about me. You can ask my landlord. I'm paying regularly now. They'll tell you I'm honest. I'm sorry. I moved the damper and the stove is smoking.
Monsieur Madeleine had listened to this with deep attention. While she was speaking, he had got out his purse, opened it, and found that it was empty. Putting it back in his pocket, he said, "How much did you say you owed?" Fantine, whose words had been addressed solely to Javert, swung round upon him.
"Am I talking to you?"
She said to the other men,
"You saw me spit in his face, didn't you?"
And then to Madeleine,
"You brute of a mayor, you've come here to frighten me, but I'm not afraid of you. I'm only afraid of Monsieur Javert, good Monsieur Javert."
She turned back to the inspector.
"The thing is, we've got to be fair, haven't we? I know you're fair, Monsieur Javert. After all, it didn't amount to anything. A man puts a little snow down a girl's back and it makes the officers laugh. Well, they've got to have their fun, and after all, that's what we girls are for. But then you come along and it's your duty to keep order, so you take away the girl who's making trouble, but then, thinking it over, and because you're kind, you decide to let me go because of my little girl, because if I spend 6 months in prison, I shouldn't be able to keep her alive. But mind you don't come back, my wench, you say to me. Oh, but I won't, Monsieur Javert, I won't. They can treat me how they like, I'll not do a thing. Only this time, you see, it hurt me, that lump of snow that I wasn't expecting, and so I lost my temper. I'm not very well, like I said. I cough a lot, and it's as though I had a lump burning inside me. It's just here, you can feel for yourself. Don't be afraid."
She was no longer weeping, and her voice was gentle. Taking Javert's large, rough hand, she pressed it, smiling against the whiteness of her throat. Then, with sudden, rapid movements, she repaired the disorder of her dress, shook out the folds of her skirt, which had mounted almost to her knee, turned and marched to the door, saying with a friendly nod to the gendarmes,
"The inspector says I can go, so now I'm going."
She had a hand on the latch, and in another instant would have been in the street. Until that moment, Javert had stood motionless, staring at the floor, a mere incident in the scene, like a statue that has not yet been put in place. But the sound of the latch aroused him from his stupor. He looked up sharply with that air of aggressive authority which is the more pronounced at the lower levels, the ferocity of a wild beast which is atrocious in a small man. "Sergeant," he cried, "can't you see the woman's walking out? Who said you could let her go?" "I did," said Madeleine. At the sound of Javert's voice, Fantine had started back, letting go the latch as though she had been caught in the act of stealing it. When Madeleine spoke, she turned to look at him, and from then on, without uttering a word and scarcely daring to draw breath, she gazed in turn from Madeleine to Javert and back, according to which of them was speaking. Javert must clearly have been thrown quite off balance, as the saying is, for him to have barked at the sergeant as he had done after being instructed by the mayor to let Fantine go free. Had he positively forgotten that the mayor was present? Had he concluded in his own mind that it was impossible for anyone in authority to give such an order, and that the mayor had spoken in error? Or had he decided, in view of the monstrous happenings of the past hour, that the time had come when a supreme gesture must be made, when the bloodhound must turn magistrate, the police officer assume the robes of justice, and that in this moment of utmost crisis, law and order, morality, government, the whole of society, were personified in himself, Javert? Be that as it may, when Monsieur Madeleine spoke the words, "I did," Police Inspector Javert was seen to turn towards him, pallid and blue-lipped, his whole body seized with a faint tremor, and with lowered eyes, but in a firm voice, he was heard to make the unprecedented reply. "Monsieur le Maire, that cannot be allowed." "Why not?" asked Monsieur Madeleine. "The woman insulted a respectable citizen." "Listen to me, Inspector Javert," Madeleine said in a calm, conciliatory voice. "I know you to be an honorable man, and I am very ready to explain my actions to you. This is the truth of the matter. I was crossing the square when you took the woman away. There were still people about, and I asked what had happened. I heard the whole story. The respectable citizen was at fault, and by the letter of the law, it was he who should have been arrested. Javert persisted. But she has insulted you, too, the mayor of this town. That is my affair, said Madeleine. An insult to me may be said to be my property. I can do what I like with it. If you'll forgive me, Monsieur le Maire, the insult was not to yourself, but to justice. Conscience is the highest justice, Inspector Javert. I heard what the woman said. I know what I'm doing. As for me, Monsieur le Maire, I can't believe my ears. Then you must be content to obey. I have to do my duty. Duty requires me to send her to prison for 6 months. Monsieur Madeleine said gently, You must be quite clear about this. She will not serve a single day in prison. The peremptory words emboldened Javert to look Madeleine full in the face. He said, still in a tone of profound respect, It distresses me deeply to take issue with Monsieur le Maire. Nothing of the kind has ever happened to me before. But I must venture to remind Monsieur le Maire that I am acting within the terms of my authority. We will confine ourselves to the matter of the citizens, since Monsieur le Maire prefers it. I was there. The woman flung herself on Monsieur Bamadabois, who is a citizen on the electoral roll and owner of the handsome house at the end of the esplanade, a 3-story stone house. Strange things happen in this world, but this is a matter of police regulations and comes within my province. I am holding the woman Fantine. At this, Monsieur Madeleine folded his arms and said in a voice that had never before been heard in the town, The regulations you refer to are those affecting the municipal police. Under Articles 9, 11, 15, and 66 of the Criminal Code, I have authority over them. I order you to release this woman. Javert made a last effort. But Monsieur le Maire, and let me also remind you of Article 81 of the law of the 13th of December 1799 dealing with arbitrary detention. Allow me, Monsieur le Maire. That's enough. But kindly leave the post, said Monsieur Madeleine. Javert received this body blow standing as rigidly as a Russian soldier. Bowing low to the mayor, he turned and left. Fantine moved away from the door to let him pass, and stared at him in stupefaction as he did so. She, too, had undergone a strange upheaval. She had found herself to be in some sort of an object of dispute between 2 opposed powers. She had witnessed a conflict between 2 men who held her liberty in their hands, her very life and that of her child. One had sought to drag her deeper into darkness, the other to restore her to light. The 2 contestants, in the heightened vision of her terror, had seemed like giants, one speaking with the voice of a demon, the other in the tones of an angel. The angel had won, and what caused her to tremble from head to foot was the fact that this rescuing angel was the man she abhorred, the abominable mayor, whom for so long she had regarded as the author of her troubles. He had saved her after she had most outrageously insulted him. Could she have been wrong? Must she now change her very heart? She did not know and stood trembling, listening in turmoil, gazing with distracted eyes, and feeling with every word that Monsieur Madeleine spoke the knot of hatred dissolve within her, while a new feeling took its place, heartwarming and inexpressible, a sense of deliverance, trust, and love. After Javert had gone, Monsieur Madeleine turned to her and spoke slowly and with difficulty, in the accents of an earnest man moved nearly to tears. I heard what you said. None of it was known to me, but I believe it to be true. I feel that it is true. I did not even know that you had left my employment. Why did you not appeal to me? No matter. I will pay your debts and arrange for your child to be brought here, or else for you to go to her. You will live here or in Paris or where you choose. You need not work if you don't want to. I will see to it that you have what money you need. You will become honest again and being happy again. But let me assure you of this, that if it has
all been as you say, and I don't doubt it, then you have never been anything but virtuous and chaste in the eyes of God. My poor girl. And this was more than Fantine could bear. To have Cosette, to escape from her present life, to be free and cared for, happy and honest, with Cosette. This prospect of paradise in the depths of her misery was too much for her. She could only gaze mutely at the man addressing her and utter little whimpering cries. Her legs gave way beneath her. She fell on her knees before Monsieur Madeleine, and before he could prevent it, had taken his hand and pressed it to her lips. Then she fainted. End of chapter 13 and book 5. Book 6, Javert. Chapter 1, The Beginning of Repose. Monsieur Madeleine had Fantine taken to the factory infirmary, where she was placed in the charge of the nursing sisters. She now had a raging fever, and for part of the night was delirious, talking in a loud voice. Eventually, however, she fell asleep. When she awoke about midday, she heard the sound of breathing at her bedside, and drawing back the curtain, saw Monsieur Madeleine standing with his eyes fixed in an expression of anguished supplication on something above her head. Looking up, she saw that there was a crucifix nailed to the wall. Monsieur Madeleine had been so transformed in the eyes of Fantine that now he seemed to her to be bathed in light. His lips were moving. She watched for a long time without venturing to interrupt him, but at length she asked timidly, "What are you doing?" He had been standing there for an hour, waiting for her to awaken. He took her hand, felt her pulse, and asked, "How do you feel?" "I'm feeling better. I've slept well. I'm sure I'm better. It was nothing serious." He then answered her question. "I have been praying to the martyr above your head," he said, and added in his thoughts, "for the martyr at my side." He had spent the night and morning ascertaining the facts, and now he knew the whole tragic story of Fantine. He went on, "You have suffered very greatly, my poor child, but you must not complain, for now you have your recompense. This is how men create saints, and it is useless to blame them because they cannot do otherwise. The hell you have endured is the doorway to heaven, through which you had to pass." He sighed deeply, but she smiled up at him, that poignant smile lacking 2 teeth. In the course of the same night, Javert had written a letter, and had himself taken it to the post office that morning. It was a letter to Paris, addressed as follows: To Monsieur Chabouillet, Secretary to the Prefect of Police. The story of the scene in the police post had already become known, and the postmistress and certain other persons, seeing the letter and recognizing Javert's handwriting, concluded that he was sending in his resignation. Monsieur Madeleine wrote at once to Thénardier. Fantine owed the couple 120 francs. He sent them 300, instructing them to use the balance of this sum to bring the child immediately to Montreuil-sur-Mer, where her mother lay ill. Thénardier was amazed. "By God," he said, "we aren't going to let the brat go. She's turned into a gold mine. I can guess what has happened. Some rich joker has taken a fancy to the mother." He replied with a circumstantial demand for a total of over 500 francs, substantiated by authentic bills from the doctor and apothecary who had attended Éponine and Azelma during long illnesses. Cosette, as we have said, had not been ill. It was simply a matter of changing the names, and he formally acknowledged receipt of the 300 francs. Monsieur Madeleine promptly sent an additional 300 francs, requesting them to bring Cosette without delay. "The devil we will," said Thénardier. Fantine, meanwhile, remained in the infirmary. She was not recovering. The nursing sisters had at first treated her with dislike. Anyone who has seen the bas-reliefs at Rheims will recall the pouting lower lip of the wise virgins confronting the foolish virgins. The immemorial scorn of Vestals for loose women is among the deepest instincts of respectable femininity, and in the case of the sisters it was enhanced by their religious vocation. But Fantine soon disarmed them with her humility and gentle manners, and their hearts were further touched by the fact that she was a mother. She said to them in a bout of fever, "I have sinned, but When my child is restored to me, it will be a sign that God has forgiven me. I could not have her with me while I was living a bad life because I could not have endured the look in her eyes. I was wicked for her sake, and that is why God has forgiven me. I shall feel God's blessing when she is here. I shall be strengthened by her innocence. She knows nothing of what has happened. She is truly an angel, dear sisters. At that age, we have still not lost our wings. Monsieur Madeleine visited her twice daily, and she invariably asked, "When shall I see Cosette?" He would answer, "Tomorrow, perhaps. She may be here at any moment," and this would cause her face to light up. But as we have said, she was not getting better. Indeed, as the weeks passed, her condition grew worse. The handful of snow rubbed on her bare back had, it seemed, dealt a shock to her system, which caused the disease that had long been dormant within her to break out in a virulent form. The method of auscultation devised by Professor Laennec for the diagnosis and treatment of pulmonary disease was then coming into use, and the doctor examined her by this means. "Well?" asked Monsieur Madeleine. "Hasn't she got a child she wants to see?" "Yes, a small daughter." "You'd better get her here as soon as possible." Madeleine was dismayed, but when Fantine asked what the doctor had said, he forced himself to smile. "He says we must get your daughter here as soon as possible, and then you'll get well." "He's right," she said. "Why are the Thénardiers keeping Cosette? She will come, won't she? And then I shall be happy again." But the Thénardiers held on to Cosette, adducing 100 dishonest reasons. She was not yet well enough to travel during the winter. There were still minor debts to be settled for which they were awaiting accounts, so on. "I shall have to send someone to fetch her," said Madeleine. "If necessary, I'll go myself." He wrote the following letter at Fantine's dictation, and then got her to sign it. "Monsieur Thénardier, you will hand Cosette over to the bearer. Everything owing will be paid. I send you my regards. Fantine." But at this point, a most serious thing happened. Do what we may to shape the mysterious stuff of which our lives are composed, the dark threads of our destiny will always reemerge. End of chapter 10.
And cut. That's a wrap, folks. Thanks for listening to today's episode of I've Been Meaning to Read That, with me, your host, Dan. If you want to learn more about the show, you can follow us on Instagram at Meaning to Read and TikTok at I've Been Meaning. If you want to support the show to help keep it going, you can find me on Venmo at Dingus Donut, DINGUSDONUT. Supporters get a shout-out on the show, and even more important, get to vote on the next book that we read. No matter what, I'll see you for our next episode. Until then, read those books you've been meaning to read, and have a lovely, lovely day.